If utopia would exist, humanity would not be there to see it. Humanity's bad nature and inability to live in heaven on earth. Written by Siegler. This analysis is about the idea that humanity's natural flaws, such as pride, selfishness, envy, aggression, dishonesty and wrong desires make it impossible for us to create, recognize or truly live in a utopia, which is like heaven on earth. Any society that seems perfect would fall apart because of human nature or need such a big change that humanity as we know it would not exist anymore. We would not be able to see it. This analysis uses ideas from theology, old philosophy, modern politics, psychology, literature, history and what is happening now. It confirms the idea that things will not get better while also responding to opposing views. The word bad is not used in a way but as a way to describe the tendencies that always get in the way of perfection, the way we are made, the way we think and the way we interact with each other. The information comes from texts and reliable scholars. Movement 1. The first mistake as the basic flaw. The Jewish and Christian tradition says that the book of Genesis shows Eden as an utopia. People lived in harmony with God, nature and each other and there was no suffering or hard work. When humanity did its first wrong act of eating the forbidden fruit, it all fell apart. The snake tempted them with the idea of being like God and Adam and Eve chose to be independent of obeying. The result was that they were thrown out and there were thorns, pain and childbirth and death. This fall introduced the idea of sin, which was passed down to all their descendants. In his books Confessions and City of God, Augustine says that sin corrupts our will. Before the fall people had the ability to not sin. After the fall they could not help but sin without God's help. Pride is the root of all sin, the beginning of all sin. People started to love themselves more than God, which messed up all their abilities. Their reason was clouded by ignorance and their desires were controlled by selfishness, especially lust, which Augustine thought was unstoppable after the fall. In City of God, Augustine says that there are two kinds of cities on earth, the city, which seeks glory, power and peace through control, and the heavenly city, which seeks true peace. The earthly city is fragile, will always fall apart. Augustine wrote this after the city of Rome was attacked in 410 AD. He responded to the idea that the old gods were abandoned, which led to the collapse. He said that human sin makes it impossible to have a society on earth. Empires fall because of the desire for control and even societies that claim to be Christian have flaws. Pelagius' idea that people are not born guilty and that they can be sinless if they just try enough was rejected by Augustine. Augustine said that people are born with a tendency to sin and that only God's help can save them. Without God's help any attempt to create a utopia, whether it is a political one or not, will fail because of ambition, divisions and hypocrisy. Thomas Aquinas also believed in the idea of sin and he said that people's natural abilities are weak. The Protestant reformers, such as Luther and Calvin, emphasized the idea of depravity, which means that people's will is controlled by sin. Calvin said that people are like factories that produce idols. The Eastern Orthodox Church talks about the effects of sin on people's spiritual abilities, which are corrupted and weakened. Heaven on earth would require people to be innocent, like they were before the fall, or to have glorified bodies, which is not possible for humans now. Any attempt to impose a utopia on earth would lead to chaos or tyranny. The Inquisition and the Puritan experiments showed how zeal can turn into oppression. Humanity's bad nature, which is focused on self-love, prevents us from creating a utopia. We might see glimpses of things like charity and justice, but they are always tainted by sin. The real utopia is something that will happen in the future when there will be a heaven and a new earth and humanity will be resurrected. Until then, we are travelers in a world of suffering. Movement 2. Ideal Societies versus Real-World Decay. Plato's book, The Republic, describes a utopia called Callipolis, where philosopher kings rule with wisdom, guardians defend the city and workers do their jobs. Justice is achieved when each person does their own job, and education, and myths help people understand their roles. The elite do not have families to prevent favoritism, and they live together in a community. Plato says that this society is impossible to achieve. In his book, Plato describes how societies can decay, from aristocracy to timocracy, where people value honor more than wisdom, to oligarchy, where wealth is the important thing, to democracy, where people are free to do what they want, and finally to tyranny, where there is chaos. This is similar to what happens to souls, where the appetitive part dominates if reason is not in control. Aristotle criticized the idea of property, saying that it leads to neglect, because people do not take care of things that belong to everyone. He said that humans are naturally unequal and that societies arise from households, but also have to accommodate nature. In his book Nicomachean Ethics he says that happiness is related to virtue, which is hard for most people to achieve. The highest state is contemplation. It is not something that can be achieved by society as a whole. Other thinkers, such as Sophocles and Thucydides, show how human pride and the desire for power can lead to ruin. Aristophanes' comedies make fun of schemes, which always seem to fail. These thinkers see utopia as an ideal that we can strive for, not something that we can actually achieve. Humanity's mixed nature, which is both rational and animal-like, ensures that we will always deviate from perfection. The idea of evil as disorder and excess prevents us from achieving a state of perfection. Movement 3. Early Modern and Enlightenment. Thomas More's book Utopia describes an island where there is no property, officials are elected, and people live together in a community. The book also has satirical elements, such as the fact that the utopians go to war and have slaves. As a Catholic, More knew about sin, and he said that the utopians lack the flaws that humans have. They are not fully human and they still have pride, which is something that cannot be eliminated. Thomas Hobbes' book Leviathan says that humans are naturally equal. This leads to a state of war, where everyone fights against everyone else. Reason suggests that we should make contracts to prevent war. Without a strong authority, people will always try to cheat. Humans are like machines, that are driven by their appetites, and the only way to prevent war is to have a government. This does not lead to a utopia, only to security. Jean-Jacques Rousseau romanticized the idea of the savage who lives in a state of nature and is not corrupted by society. He also said that society introduces flaws, such as vanity and inequality. His book, The Social Contract, says that people should come together to form a will, which would lead to true freedom. His book Meal admits that education has its limits, and he later became pessimistic about the possibility of creating a perfect society. Other thinkers, such as Voltaire and Immanuel Kant, were optimistic about the possibility of progress. They also knew that humans have flaws. Kant said that humans are like timber and that we cannot create something straight and perfect from it. He said that perpetual peace requires governments, but he also knew that war is rooted in human nature. Movement 4. Existentialism, totalitarianism. Friedrich Nietzsche rejected the idea of a utopia, saying that it is a form of slave morality that denies life. He said that humans are driven by a will to power and that utopias try to level out excellence and achieve mediocrity. He said that the Übermensch can transcend flaws, but that the majority of people will always resist this. Existentialist thinkers, such as Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, said that human freedom and contingency make it impossible to create an utopia. Martin Heidegger said that humans are often inauthentic and that we need to take responsibility for our lives. Totalitarian regimes, such as Marxism and fascism, tried to create utopias. They failed because they ignored human nature. The results were Stalin's purges, the Cultural Revolution, and other forms of oppression. Movement 5. Wired for imperfection, evolutionary psychology and empirical science. Humans evolved to live in groups, where cooperation and reciprocity were important. When societies get bigger, they scale poorly. People are naturally parochial. They prioritize their own group over others. They are also naturally selfish. They engage in self-deception and tribalism. Studies have shown that antisocial traits are heritable and that people are naturally inclined to lie and cheat. Fear and aggression are human responses and they can override rational control. Humans are also naturally imperfect. They adapt to their circumstances in ways that are not always rational. Movement 6. Literary dystopias and historical failures. Books like New World, 1984 and The Handmaid's Tale show how utopias can fail. The same thing happened in real-life experiments, such as the Oneida Community, the Fourier phalanxes and the Soviet Union. These experiments failed because of flaws, such as envy, scarcity and the desire for power. Movement 7. Counter-arguments, rebuttals. Some people argue that technology, such as intelligence, could change human nature and create a utopia. This is a risk, and it could lead to new forms of oppression. Humility is an approach and it can help us create better societies even if they are not perfect. Humanity's nature, which is profound and structural, prevents us from creating a utopia on Earth. We can try to manage our flaws. We can strive for excellence, but we should not be deluded into thinking that we can create a perfect society. This realism can actually liberate us. Help us create meaning in a world that is imperfect.